Right, let's make a start. It's just after 4 o'clock, so we'll crack on. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome along to this month's planning committee. We don't normally have this few people in the chamber today, so we'll try and cope with the space. But good to see you all. Apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Darcy and apologies received from Councillor Riley. Councillor Rainsford is substituting today.
Alison, welcome along to the wonderful world of the planning committee. Hopefully it won't be the last time we see you. Declarations of interest, we're just going to do that verbally as we do on most committees. So I saw Ian first.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Roy Harris, a personal interest. I've known him for past, but I only just recognised him today as I came in. It'll have no impact on my decision making at this plan by me.
So that's on item. You mean that's on item 6.1, and that's the applicant that's known to you, private interest.
Correct.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Any others? As ever, if anything occurs that you haven't thought of now interest-wise during the meeting, just wait for the next natural pause and let me know, and we'll enter that into the minutes. Speaking of which, are we happy to agree those from August 24th? Yep. Okay. I will sign those. And Tina, if you could pass those over, I'd be grateful. Thank you. There's no urgent business from me as chair. I don't think we have any questions from the public. Is that correct?
No questions today, Chair. Okay,
that takes on then to item 6 and 6.1, the planning application today, and that's at page 5 in your papers. We're at 24 Carew Gardens, and Cody, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. The application has been referred to the Planning Committee by Councillor Zoe Riley. 24 Carew Gardens is a 2-storey semi-detached dwelling located in the Honnocknall ward of Plymouth. The land to the rear of the property was purchased from a developer in 2017. Works including a 2-metre high rear boundary fence and outbuilding were completed in 2018. This application seeks to regularise the change of use from amenity to residential curtilage and the development of the outbuilding. Okay. Prior to development, the 2012 street scene images show the triangular piece of land. Although described as amenity, the land has not previously been adopted by Plymouth City Council. Officers recognise that this parcel of land is fairly small in size and appears overgrown, and therefore it's not considered to hold a high quality amenity use. These photos provided by the applicant show the land during clearing. The level of the land has not changed as confirmed by the applicant. Works were completed, including levelling the land and removing any debris prior to development. Letters of representation raised concerns regarding the removal of TPO trees. However, officers cannot find any record of these trees being registered as TPO. As this is a retrospective application, the works and development are already in situ. From the 2022 street view, we can see the rear fence and outbuilding from Warwick Orchard Close. Officers do not consider the development to be out of keeping with the existing street scene. The road to the rear features many side and rear boundary fences along with parking provisions, and therefore it's thought that the additional fencing and boundary treatment do not cause any significant adverse impacts on the street scene or character. This plan shows the site arrangement and the orientation of the outbuilding. It's situated along the northern boundary and faces south. The applicant's original garden land level is approximately 50 centimetres lower than the rear purchase land, and therefore steps have been constructed to allow access. The land forward of the outbuilding features landscaping and boundary planting, which has provided additional levels of screening. The share boundary fence between 22 and 24 measures 1.6 metres in height. From these pictures, you can see that prior to development, the rear boundary fence of number 22 measured only 1.6 metres in height. However, the applicant has added an additional rear fence, bringing this boundary to 2 metres. Due to the privacy and overlooking concerns raised within the letters of representation, officers have negotiated additional fencing on the shared boundary to admit this. The corner section of the southern boundary will be raised from 1.6 to 2 metres in height for a total length of 2 metres. Officers did not consider raising the full stretch of the fence preferable due to the existing concerns regarding enclosure of the neighbouring property. With this additional screening, officers consider the development not to give rise to significant overlooking and privacy impacts, and therefore consider it to be in accordance with policy. The outbuilding measures approximately 7.2 metres in length, with one end measuring 1.9 metres in depth and the other 3 metres in depth, which has created a wedge shape. The roof features a shallow slope with a maximum height of 2.4, and when combined with the higher land level, this brings the maximum height of the outbuilding, when measured from the original garden, to approximately 3 metres. The outbuilding features double doors to allow access to the main area, an additional door, and 2 full-height windows. The side door allows access into the shed area of the outbuilding, which is entered from the east. The building itself is considered to be residential in character and features cedar cladding with white PVC elements to match the existing. The design and materials are considered to complement those of the main dwelling house, and therefore development is considered to be in accordance with the policy. To conclude, officers consider the development of the outbuilding and the change of use of land to residential curtilage to be in accordance with Dev 1 and Dev 20 of the Joint Local Plan, and have therefore recommended conditional approval. 2 conditions have been recommended. The first relating to the additional screening, which requires the applicant to erect the fence within 3 months of approval, and the second relates to the use of the rear outbuilding, which was restricted to ancillary use only. Thank you.
Cody, thank you very much. Our first speaker on this item is Councillor Zoe Riley. Zoe, if you'd like to make your way down. Mind the fan on your way. It'll come as no surprise to you that you've got 5 minutes. Would you like to be told when 4 have gone? Okay, in your own time.
Hi. As ward councillor, and having been approached about this, I thought I'd better speak. So this application has a recommendation to grant conditionally in retrospect, which technically means that it was built without permission, and now we're looking at it. I would like you to look at it in a different way, as if it was here today. Would you grant it if this was in front of you today? It has taken away local amenity. However small that may be, it has done that. And it is overlooking. And the resident in 22 is concerned about that overlooking. It is raised. Another condition is that the constructed building will be used only for enjoyment of the family living in the residence. But there is an enforcement case that we're not allowed to talk about today and shouldn't be used in this situation, but it is being looked into as a business. So I think, we need to think about what's going on with rules and procedures of the planning. What message are we sending out if we say that there are many issues with this construction, but there are many issues with this application and a lack of consideration for those procedures and for those rules that we sit here for. But we're going to grant it anyway because it's already been built. So I just ask you, and I know that you'll do this, consider it very carefully on both sides. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Zoe. Our next speaker is Rachel Bell. Is Mrs. Bell? There we are. If you'd like to make your way down, you're very welcome. You two will have 5 minutes. Would you like to be told when only one is left? Okay. Whenever you're ready.
So I sit here today in objection to the planning application from number 24 Crewe Gardens for the change of use of land and the development of outbuilding. As a direct neighbour of number 24 Crewe Gardens and the occupants of number 22 Crewe Gardens, we have serious concerns regarding the application. Living in Crewe Gardens for the past 18 years, we have enjoyed peace and tranquility that the cul-de-sac has offered. Our large back garden has been enjoyed over the years by ourselves, family and close friends, gathering for barbecues, enjoying the sun and being a private and enclosed space for us to enjoy bringing our children up. Our back garden was in keeping with the row of houses in the cul-de-sac, all being secluded by the greenery of a vast amount of trees which completely secluded Crewe Gardens from the backing of Warwick Orchard Close. This still remains the case for all other properties in Crewe Gardens that back onto Warwick Orchard Close. However, this changed for our property 5 years ago when Mr. Harris purchased the land directly behind our back garden, unbeknown to ourselves without planning permission. All the trees, and may I add, that under Key Issues Section 7 of this application state, the land featured a small grass area, hedges and 2 to 3 trees. This is incorrect. There was an abundance of trees that housed many wildlife along our boundary hedge and extended to the walkway path of Warwick Orchard Close. Under Amenity Section 11, in terms of proposed works having an impact on the neighbouring amenity, Mr. Harris chopped all of these trees down and then proceeded to burn them on the purchased land. This did in fact have a significant detrimental impact on the neighbouring amenity due to an out-of-control fire and the local fire brigade being called by many concerned residents due to the effects from the smoke produced. Mr. Harris then proceeded to construct the business premises outbuilding, which is positioned facing into our garden on raised land that also allows any visitors to overlook and access views into our property back windows. This followed by months of construction work, over and exceeding Plymouth City Council work times, and also caused Crewe Gardens residents disruption to a shared walkway used for emergency access being dug up with no prior warning to the residents for Mr. Harris to plumb in a toilet and wash basin into the outbuilding. I now draw my attention to Dev 1, protecting health and amenity. As stated, the maximum height of the outbuilding is 3 metres. Add this to the raised land that it's built on. This shows that a 2-metre fence will not protect our privacy. The planning officers state that they have considered that the development could create vantage points into neighbouring gardens with specific focus on the area in front of the outbuilding door. Therefore, the additional screening will not provide privacy into our private garden and property windows. Over the past 5 years, our privacy has been seriously compromised, leaving our family members vulnerable to the overbearing actions caused by Mr. Harris, using the vantage points, but more importantly, the raised land, leaving our family members vulnerable and affecting our well-being and enjoyment of our private home and garden space. Due to this, I strongly disagree with the planning officer's recommendations and conclusions under Dev 1, specifically highlighting outlook and privacy as my objection. We believe the only way we can regain our privacy and to once again enjoy our home and garden as a family is to ask that planning permission is not granted and the land to be returned as it was before. So I put it to all committee members today to ask yourselves, taking into account the concerns highlighted and concerns around recommendations, would you seriously want to live being overlooked, unsafe, and with your privacy seriously compromised? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed. Ms. Bell, if you'd like to make your way back. Thanks. And our final speaker is Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris is here. There we are. If you'd like to make your way down, sir. You're welcome to join us too. 5 minutes will be yours as well. Would you like to be told when only one is left? Okay. Over to you.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. Thanks for having us. I've got a very short statement in regards to the planning application for the request to change the use of land at Crewe Gardens. As has been stated, we acquired this land in 2017 through the purchase of the previous developer of the estate. This land was not known to be, what was it called? Amenity land. We were led to believe that it was actually Greenland garden land, and it's actually being sold to us as garden land. And it's stated that on the TP1 and on the title deed. Regrettably, there seems to be a misinterpretation on my part in regarding to the assumption that the land would be seemingly become part of our home and garden, and that we needed to seek the change of use prior to this land. The land, which seems to have been registered as amenities land since 1983 by the developer, has not really truly served the purpose of amenity land in its conventional sense. Instead, it has regrettably become, or had become, an area prone to fly tipping, with instances of general rubbish, rubble, bikes, dog waste, bags, scrap metal, shopping trolleys, and even clinical oxygen bottles being discarded on the plot of land by others. This is the reason why we had the skip, which you've seen in one of the pictures, to dispose of various rubbish that's on the ground. Unfortunately, this undesirable practice still persists, with people continuing to deposit garden waste and rubble and various other items on the area that is unfenced on the land that we purchased. This situation seems to have even worsened since the local government imposed charges for garden waste disposal, and the land has been increasingly used for unauthorised dumping. Additionally, the car park hedge line running north of the adjoining property is the location for the disposal of garden waste and rubbish, which is far unknown, owned and developed by the previous developer. Furthermore, this area is unchecked, allowing the growth of ivy, trees and brambles to encroach upon the access path to the rear of 24 to 30 Carew Gardens. The situation is a stark contrast to the original condition of the land prior to acquisition. The Warwick Orchard Estate, which the land was originally attached to, is a blend of public and privately managed ownership pathways and car parks, which unfortunately has experienced neglect over the time. The pathways are in a state of disrepair and have become overgrown, along with the boundary walls and the car parks, which are mostly unstable, with one wall even falling onto the pedestrian walkway. It's worth noting there is no TPOs on this estate, on this part, associated with our land and asserted in the objections. The nearest TPO is located between Warwick Orchard and Chard Barton, as indicated on the area TPO maps. We have responsibly removed 3 hawthorn trees and a substantial amount of overgrowth, such as brambles, ivies and weeds, which while preserving the mature wild cherry and sycamore trees on our land. Notably, we were approached by a neighbour 3 years ago with the request to remove these trees, a request we have declined. Regarding the ground height, there has been no increase making up in the height, as mentioned in the objections. We have maintained the original level to ensure it does not undermine the adjacent car park and public pathways. We are aware of the comments made by Mr. Solomon, which have been recorded as objections. These comments appear to provide a more historical insight into the land's condition prior to our purchase, and we also note that this was submitted after the deadline of the 26th of October. We have taken note of 3 objections from our neighbour residents, along with their comments. Currently, we believe there's no need to go into a detailed response to these comments. However, it is important to clarify that any visitors to number 24 Carew Gardens are solely entertained in the immediate rear garden of our home. In terms of privacy, we have planted various evergreens, including cherry laurels, beech, buddleia and climbers along the fence lines to enhance the privacy of our gardens, and are set out to obstruct views. In respect of the comments of the privacy of the adjoining property, the only brief vantage point allowing the view into number 22 is from the steps leading to the proposed change of use of land. This viewpoint was originally covered with the jasmine climbers, which unfortunately have perished due to the last winter, and so we acknowledge the proposal from planning to look to install a fence extension to the side fence between number 22, raising its height to 2 metres to match the existing fencing by a linear metre of 2 metres. I'd like to emphasise that our acquisition of this land was driven by the intent to create an enjoyable and productive garden allotment where we could grow vegetables and relish the garden while embracing... Sorry?
You're going to finish your sentence?
Yeah, sorry. Considering the above, we would kindly request that the Planning Committee consider seeing in our favour our application for the change of use and lands. And lastly, we'd like to thank your time.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. If you'd like to make your way back. It's now open to the committee. James.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in terms of the condition on the, what's the word? It's gone out of my head. The fence, or the, what's it called? Boundary, thank you. Thank you very much. Can you just go into a bit more detail?
We get that training organised.
Can you just go into a bit more detail about what the condition sets out along the boundary between number 24 and number 22 in terms of the privacy that's going to give to 22?
So we agreed on a corner section for the 2-metre high fence. We didn't think it would be suitable to stretch it any further. I mean, it's well under this permitted development to stretch it further. However, I felt, well, I kind of feared that because of the existing concerns regarding the sort of enclosure and overbearingness, I thought if we raised that whole fence, that's going to cause even more of a problem and that's going to impact them more. So we decided 2 metres was probably sufficient. That's to block from the top of the stairs, as Mr. Harris said, because as soon as you sort of enter or go down those steps, you can't see into the rear garden.
So just to clarify, when you are on the steps of the outbuilding with this new fence in situ, are you going to be able to see into the garden of number 22 when you're stood on the steps? Yes or no?
There is a slight degree of overlooking, just as there is with the other neighbours, although I do not consider it to be against any of our policies. I think it's pretty common with the new build sites that with the smaller gardens, there is some degree. However, I don't believe there to be any additional significant impact.
Having been on the site visit, my instinct, if you like, and obviously only been there for a short period of time like any site visit is that there is increased overlooking. And for me, the key is the surrounding of the neighbour's garden now. When it was purchased, both gardens backed onto the amenity lands, so they obviously had a shared perpendicular. We're all struggling for words today, aren't we? But the boundary between the houses, with both sharing a boundary onto the amenity land. Now the amenity land has gone, pending the decision today. The garden of number 24 now surrounds them, if you see what I mean. That's the worry for me. That's where I was. Kathy.
My concern is that way back in 1982, the whole estate was set out with this amenity land in it, and I'd want to be convinced that there was no purpose now, or the estate had changed to such an extent that the amenity land was no longer required. Can you convince me of that, please?
In terms of the amenity land on the 82 sort of permission, it was proposed to be a through road onto Carew Gardens. However, during the planning process, that got scrapped and it was removed. The only label that we could find on the historic plans were that it was to be retained and maintained by the developer at the time. That's the only sort of information that we have on that piece of land in terms of its use.
Are you saying that that piece of land was retained as a ransom strip rather than as amenity land?
I think we had a discussion and we sort of decided it would be classed as undeveloped land rather than high quality amenity land.
Thanks. Who's next? Patrick?
It's really, I think it's a point to a learning lesson here in terms of the development of estates, because generally lots of estates get developed, but actually after they're developed, the adoption of land doesn't always get followed through. So there's a big issue here. I think that members should take on board for future developments that shutting down these innocuous bits of land post everybody moving in and adoption of highways is quite important, because generally it never gets completely finished and then builders go into liquidation and so forth. So I think, you know, there is a lesson here that I don't think your report, and I know Councillor Watkins made that very valid point just then, is necessarily covered off in the recommendation you're making, because I actually do take on board what the objector and Councillor Riley have said, in that when this site was planned, it never planned to have this in the garden. And if it wasn't there now, would we be granting permission? And I have to say that probably on instinct, I wouldn't be supporting it, based on the fact that if this was actually how it should have been used in the past, they wouldn't have kept that piece of land. And whilst it might not be high quality, what we haven't talked about is the environmental impact. So it may be a bit of scrub land, but there would have been probably some nature. So what's the impact from our nature policies of this compared to what it should have been prior to it being sort of bulldozed? Please, thank you.
Yeah, as you said, you know, we didn't consider it to be a high amenity land. In terms of nature, it appeared to be overgrown, not managed. As I said, the TPO, there was no record of the TPO at all, so we didn't consider it necessary to consult our natural infrastructure team. And, you know, it is regrettable that green space has been lost. However, anyone is under the permitted development rights that they can pave over their rear garden, and they're allowed to do that without consulting the council at all.
I'll just come back on that, because fine what you say to a point, but we do have policies on biodiversity. This isn't permitted development. This is a planning application before the planning committee for members to decide against all policies of the council. So what assessment's been made about biodiversity? And have you not perhaps considered, even though you might want to recommend approval to members, that actually there should be some biodiversity net gain in the current proposal that actually sees some of the worth that would have existed, even though it had been scrubland? You get birds and animals and other nature, which a mowed lawn wouldn't necessarily replicate. So have you given any consideration to that in your recommendation?
I didn't initially make any consideration to that. However, you know, upon reflection, we could include a condition to add a bird box. I think that's a standard one that natural infrastructure teams support. And again, we could talk to the natural infrastructure team to see what they would deem appropriate to sort of omit that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Ian was next. Ian Poyser. Too many Ians on the committee now. Sorry, it's for the confusion. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I believe there was some photographs which were looking, which aren't in the pack. I wonder if you could just go to those which looked at the boundary line. That's it there, yeah. We're talking about this particular land of having amenity value of some kind, but also, as Councillor Nicholson pointed out, there's potentially some benefit there towards nature when those shrubs and trees were in there, which should have been taken into account. But also, there was some screening value in there as well, I believe, for the neighbours, that if we were looking at this for the first time, we would take into consideration as part of the screening and what trees could have been or shrubs could have been retained to maintain screening rather than introduction of a fence. So I'm just wondering what we could do at this stage in terms of trying to improve screening for other than a fence, in a sense. Is there anything else we could do to improve screening?
At the site visit, it was, you know, we could see what Mr. Harris had done in terms of plantation. Given that it's winter, there was quite a few plants. I think Chair might have seen those as well. We could potentially add a condition to retain these and to maintain them, and obviously not cut them down. I think that might be appropriate to do, and I'm sure that the applicant will probably agree to that too.
Rebecca was next.
Thank you, Chair. Just essentially building on what both Ian and Patrick have said, I'll go with what's on the screen at the moment. I wasn't at the site visit yesterday, unfortunately, because I was working, but to me, on that photograph on the right-hand side, it's those two existing windows that seemed to be the most problematic. There's obviously the shrubs facing towards the rear of the photograph. Was any consideration given to and equally the fence is higher there. That's where the 2 metre fence is coming, isn't it? Is along that line. Okay, so that solves that overlooking to a certain extent then. You don't have a photograph of what it would show, what it would look like with that 2 metre fencing in there, do you? You might have shown it to us. Oh,
This is the elevation that we have.
Okay.
And sort of the hatched line would be where the new fence would be.
Okay, I think on that photograph it might have been helpful to have had a line in just to show where it would be for future reports. But the other question I've got, and I suppose this reflects back on what Patrick said, if this had come as a planning application rather than as a retrospective...
Well, it is still a planning application.
Sorry, what I mean is if
be clear.
a planning application that wasn't retrospective. Yeah. Sorry, forgive me, Chair. I think we would have looked at what could have been done with the roof, for example. You know, we're dealing with a rubber roof rather than a green roof, and I think it's just that mitigation that we could have done as a committee, because actually one of the things I think this committee has in common is we're all pretty hot on making things as green as possible in the city, and I just think it's a shame because it's got that retrospective nature that we haven't been able as a planning authority to say what we would have liked is this. So was any consideration given about that, or is that something that we're not able to condition, that change in material?
Our main concerns were with the privacy and overlooking, so that was my main focus on overcoming. In terms of the outbuilding roof, there's quite a few outbuildings throughout Plymouth, none that I have granted with a green roof. Yeah, in terms of the type of roof, it's pretty standard to have a flat roof with a rubberized for an outbuilding. So yeah, no, we didn't consider asking the applicant to change that the roof element at all.
Okay, Rebecca, thanks. You've mentioned a couple of times with the amenity land that it wasn't of, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so if I overstep the mark, please tell me. It wasn't of great quality. But for my money, a lot of these sort of 1970s, 80s estates, and we've had the sort of era alluded to, aren't based around huge fields and football pitch type bits of green, but a little bit of greenery here and there just to break up the buildings. And it seems to me that's what we've lost. So when we talk about amenity land, how much do we look at the actual quality? And I'm quite prepared to accept that what was there before wasn't sort of in Capability Brown's area in terms of expertise, but was a nice little bit of green area that just, people might walk their dogs on it and let the dog do their business on there rather than the pavement and clear it up and just separate out the buildings. So how much do we need to look at quality, which I appreciate it wasn't of the highest quality in terms of being pristine, kept formal gardens, but was just a nice little bit of green space. How do we judge amenity land in that way?
We had a look at sort of the size and also the overgrowth that it is. I think when you compare this photo with the next photo, you can actually see the land appears a lot larger because of how overgrown it was. This is not a piece of land that we...
When you say it appears... Sorry to interrupt.
No.
It appears a lot larger, or it is a lot larger?
I think it is a lot larger. You can't see the full extent through these photos to how large that piece of land is. Where was I going? Sorry. Yeah, in terms of what we would consider as amenity, it's not considered that this piece of land would be used for children to play football on, etc. As you said, as you walk past, your dog could walk on that too. But in terms of activity and sort of, I agree that it does provide some sort of amenity in terms of visual amenity. It provides some greenery within the estate. However, it wasn't considered high enough quality to be retained.
Thanks. Sarah was next.
Thank you, Chair. Again, having listened to Councillor Riley representing her residents' concerns, I'm also concerned about how people in that neighbourhood looking in sort of see this and the application of the rules. So I suppose my concern is about the condition and the application of the conditions, and actually how strong and unambiguous is condition 3 about ancillary use only?
So the ancillary use only is a condition that we often use in planning. It's just to ensure that there are no business uses, and if they do wish to have a business use, they come in for a separate permission for that. This building is to be used solely for the purpose of the family, if that be hosting a barbecue, whatever you would do at home to use that building. So that is focused on that.
What's the thinking behind that? Because I would have thought if we're looking for minimal, given that number 24 has now got a much bigger garden than they would have had before, I would have thought use of the building during the daytime for business, when a lot of people don't socialise, most people are either out at work or at home, you know, if they work from home, would be minimal disruption, whereas barbecues and socialising at the evenings and weekend would maximise the disturbance. Or is there something I'm not seeing?
I mean, we, as planning, like as the planning authority, we can't control what people are doing in their gardens and when they're doing them. In terms of the business use, as I said, it's a separate enforcement case at the minute. If our enforcement team deem that it does need a separate planning, they will take action on that. But at this time, it's still open.
Stuart, if you want to come in, by all means.
Yeah, just to respond on that as well, Chair, obviously the use that the applicant is applying for is for it to be residential. So the purpose of the condition is just to make sure that when you make your decision on the application that we are clear that it's for residential use. Obviously ancillary allows, you know, certain things that doesn't change the primary use. So, you know, occasional work from home, etc., isn't going to turn a residential use into a business use. So it gives you that flexibility, but before you isn't a question as to whether it's, you know, can it be used for business use, because that's not the application.
Thanks. Sarah, I interrupted your questioning. Is that anything else from you?
No, that was actually quite helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. James.
Thank you, Chair. So if the committee are minded to reject this application today, and the building has to be demolished, does the land then have to return to the state that it was, or would it be left?
In relation to the land, there could, because the applicant owns that land, under permitted development, there could be potential for him to fence the land under permitted development rules, which apply that there is an allowance for the fence to be erected under certain circumstances and in certain height restrictions on land that is in your ownership.
Do we know what those restrictions would be and how would they differ from what's there at the moment or indeed being applied for?
In relation to height restrictions, I believe that it would be a metre fence adjacent to the highway.
Okay, James, for now. Thanks. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Most of the questions I had have been asked in one form or another, but picking up on Councillor Smith's point about overlooking, if I may, when the site visit was undertaken, you were looking over the existing fence, which is how much lower than the 2 metre?
The existing fence is 40 centimetres lower, so it measures 1.6.
Right, okay. And Chair said that there was overlooking over the existing fence, but was anybody standing there with a rod or a pole to say this is what the height of the next fence will be, because it could make a significant difference? And are the gardens overlooked by house windows at the first floor currently? Is there already existing overlooking?
There's a degree of existing overlooking. The photos that were provided by the neighbour can show what sort of she can see into his garden and what you can sort of get a gauge of what they can see. I'll just bring that up just so you can look at it. So there is a degree of overlooking. In terms of, was anyone sort of holding a stick out to say this would be the new fence? We didn't do that. However, the rear fence does measure 2 meters, so we could sort of follow that line whilst we was on the site visit.
Kathy, and then did I see Patrick again? Yes, Kathy first.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm going back to the definition of business and residential use and working from home, because I think there could be a great fudge there where you've got people who are perhaps actually running a business from home, but you wouldn't know it because they're actually doing it through computers and all the rest of it. So can you tell me how that is defined and how you differentiate between the two, please?
Yeah, it's certainly a grey area. So each case will be considered on its merits and the disruption, that is caused as a result. So if it is one person working from home on a computer and there's no deliveries, there's no people coming to and from the properties, there's no clients coming to the property, then that would be within the existing use of the dwelling house if the primary use of the land is for a dwelling house. Whereas if you do have those other impacts, you do have clients meeting on site on a regular basis, then that's where the change of use would occur.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the condition 2 privacy screen, what consideration was given and what discussion has taken place either with the applicant or there have been representations around natural planting? So it's all very well extending the height of a fence, but you could have trellis with natural growth on it. You could be looking at appropriate trees or shrubs, other ways of screening, which actually would have helped mitigate the loss of the amenity land in the first place. What level of discussion has taken place around that, please?
I reached out to the applicant to suggest that we do need some sort of privacy fence. He responded with coming back to say sort of a similar style to what there is already, which I found acceptable due to there's quite a few concerns about privacy and overlooking. I agree, trellis is better for the environment, but then again, there's gaps in trellis, so it could be argued that that wouldn't necessarily work. Therefore, I considered that the solid wooden fence would be best.
Just looking as if we're going through the normal planning application process rather than looking at retrospective. If this was going through the normal planning application, would we have the opportunity to comment on the orientation of the building itself, the outbuilding, and the positioning of the windows? And because we're looking at determining change of use in this case.
Can I interrupt in? This is a planning application for what's in front of us.
It is indeed,
so
yes.
From that perspective, imagine there's nothing there. That's the fact that something is there has no relation to whether we vote for or against today.
I understand, yeah. If we're looking at this in terms of change of use for the land and the use of the land for that, I'm just referring to Councillor Stoneman's point around what would happen if we weren't to grant change of use. Would it have to go back to as it was before? Is there anything we can do in terms of through the planning process to look at the existing building and the orientation of the building and the windows of the building?
Can I just confirm that you want to know if we can sort of change or alter the orientation and the layout of the windows? So in a normal planning process, obviously this wouldn't have already been constructed. So we would consider, we are in our rights to ask to change the orientation or to remove or add a window. However, I'm unsure on, we could ask the applicant, but they could say no. And in that case, it would have to be sort of decided as it is. And then obviously they'd go through the enforcement route if it deemed unacceptable.
So if we were unhappy with the layout or footprint of the building, for whatever reason any of us had, that would be a consideration to vote against. Is that correct?
Yeah, so as with any other application, we need to determine what is before us. So we don't have the ability to make changes at this point. We're here to make a decision about what is in front of us. So you're perfectly entitled to make comments about it might be better, orientated in another way. But ultimately, we need to just come to a conclusion on the application before us, as is. The only difference with a retrospective application is obviously during the negotiation period before we get to planning committee, you don't have that ability to test those options as you would. But it's an application before us.
But the committee isn't part of that negotiation process. We can only judge what's here. So if we're unhappy with something for material planning reasons, we can vote against. Yeah. Thanks. Rebecca?
Again, this may have been said in a different way, but just to clarify, we've talked about what could have been possible with permitted development if this wasn't what's before us now. Could the building have been built under permitted development, or would we, irrespective, there needs to be a planning application for that building? Could you just clarify that, just for the record, please?
Permitted development in relation to incidental ancillary outbuildings, which this could be, is allowed, but it has to be within a residential curtilage, and currently this isn't within a residential curtilage. I don't know whether in relation to the sort of height of the building, that would be, I'd have to get my planning colleague to comment on that, but the starting point is that it isn't within a residential curtilage, so it could not be considered to be under permitted development.
So that's a no in this case?
Yeah.
Any more? Well, having been on the site visit and listened to colleagues, I'm very concerned about this, and I come back to my point about the loss of amenity land, and I'm just worried that precedents will be set that, on the face of it, even allowing for the trimmed back photograph that we saw showing this size, it's still quite a big chunk that's lost. It might not be big in the grand scheme of things, but a chunk here and a chunk there does add up. And I just think we would be setting a dangerous precedent to go on a road to losing all the bits of amenity land here. And I do worry about the surrounding of the garden of number 22 there. It's not just a case of visual privacy and what you can see, but the fact there'll be activity associated with the neighbours on both sides there now. When they purchased and moved in, there was only on one side, which most of us are entitled to expect when we live with next door neighbours. So that's where I am at the moment. Don't think I'm in a position to support this, but obviously it's up to each of us to come to our own conclusions, and it's that lack of amenity this would allow if we passed it that worries me. But this is our chance to change anything before we do vote, and Alison has indicated, so yep.
Can I take some clarification, because I'm obviously new to this? That piece of land was sold to the applicant before the applicant had any intention to build, and therefore technically is it actually part of the planning application? Because he could have taken that land and taken it back and put a lawn there and not a building, couldn't he?
Ownership doesn't have anything to do with us, but we could only judge who owns the land isn't a factor, and from my perspective, we can only go on what's proposed. There might, for any planning application, there might be several other sort of alternative permutations that finances and logistics allow. We can only, which in our minds, some may be better, some may be worse. We can only go on is this appropriate? The applicant hasn't chosen to come forward with a lawn or anything else, which they would have been fully entitled to ask, just as they've asked for this. So Is that a fair summation? Don't want to bring it to conclusion without asking our officers.
No, I think the issue that we've got is that the land itself isn't designated for anything in the local plan, so it's not designated as a green space. We need to make sure that we're not treating it as green space because it isn't a designated site. Therefore, it doesn't have to go through the same tests as that would. I mean, as we've kind of discussed, it appears that it's land that was left over after the development of the residential schemes has been retained in the ownership of the developer, so it's not been adopted by the council, it's not part of the highway, and that ownership has obviously changed hands. So I think it's been referred to as amenity. I think the amenity that we are referring to is a visual amenity in the sense of it's been undeveloped to this point and it's had greenery on it. That's probably the extent of the amenity value of the site. So the ownership isn't really an impact, and obviously then public access again is not guaranteed. It's not in any designation, so we can't guarantee public access through the planning process.
Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Can you just explain the difference between amenity land and green space for me, please?
Yeah, so the plan, the joint local plan identifies various kind of green spaces throughout the city. So they have different functions, different purposes, but generally to provide, like I say, yeah, those different functions. But public access would be assumed on many of those spaces, or they play an important habitat function, for instance. Whereas this land isn't designated, so it's not been identified for that specific purpose. Therefore, it's not kind of shown on the proposals map within the local plan. So it's undesignated land effectively. It's been described as amenity land, I think, because of that visual amenity that it's provided in the past. But that's, as I understand, there's no other planning history on that land.
Thanks. Anybody else? Okay, I think we're able to move to a conclusion. Thank you very much for all the questions and comments. I think that was really useful, and we've given this one a really good oversight, which is our job and our role after all. So the recommendation is there on page 5 to grant conditionally. Those in favour vote for, those against vote no. So if we could move to the vote, please. That timing is so annoying, isn't it? Why we don't do anything about that? Well, no, good stuff. Okay, so that's refused. And in terms of the refusal reasons, which we now have to give those of us who voted that way, it is that visual amenity for me that you just mentioned, Stuart. That was key. Anybody want to add? Because we did have a good discussion. I'll go around the committee first. Patrick.
For me, the biodiversity, probably net loss, I would suggest, from what I can see, but that needs to be calculated, and the application isn't green enough. It's not doing enough to mitigate the loss of the previous amenity land. Thank you.
Thanks. James, did I see your hand up? Yep.
Overlooking.
Okay, thanks. Ian Poyser.
Much the same as Councillor Nicholson as well, loss of net grain and overlooking and visual amenity.
Sarah.
And it's that potential ambiguity about what we've discussed about when is a business not a business, what does ancillary actually mean?
Paul?
It was surrounding the neighbour's garden.
I think that will probably come into the overlooking. Again, it's not necessarily a visual I can see, but it's the presence, if you like. Anyone want to add anything that we haven't heard? Kathy was poised there, but okay, that's fine, that's fine. Stuart, are you and Cody then able to distill? Is there anything in there that's obviously either non-material or totally inappropriate to the way the discussion has gone?
So thank you, Chair. So I've got the first reason being the loss of visual amenity and the impact on biodiversity. Is that, and I think
at this stage, Stuart's going to read out our refusal reason. If anyone disagrees, feel free to chip in and interrupt Stuart. If you don't, I'll take these as agreed. Stuart, back to you.
So the loss of visual amenity and the impact on biodiversity, contrary to Dev 26 on biodiversity, I would need to check the policy on amenity. I don't know if you've got it to hand, Cody, or, but we will check the policy reference on that in terms of visual amenity. And then the second one being the impact of unacceptable overlooking to the neighbouring property, contrary to Dev 1. There was a comment about the ancillary use, but I'm not sure how we would frame that as a reason for refusal. There's a certain amount of ancillary use is allowed, and we have got a condition in there that would safeguard against business use.
Sarah, I think that was your point. Did you want to feel free to come back in?
I think, yeah, it's this thing about to make sure it doesn't intensify the use of the site. I suppose my concern is how is that actually policed and enforced? There must be something in the joint local plan.
Well, we've refused it planning permission. What we're looking for now are the reasons behind saying no. So that's what we're. Patrick, I think, can we come in this
I don't think, on Councillor Allen's point, I know what you're trying to make, but I think the condition proposed by officers would have, as much as possibly the planning committee can safeguard the site, I think that's all you can do with that condition. In the event the condition is not complied with, then you go down the enforcement route. So I'm not sure you can use that as a reason to refuse because the officers are recommending a protection.
I think had we voted in favour, that would have been something for someone of your view to keep an eye on. But as it doesn't have permission as of now, I think that's sort of off the table from that perspective. Is that a fair way of looking at it? Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, go on. Yeah, okay. Do you just want to perhaps just summarise what you've got and then what's going to go into the decision notice for the committee's benefits? Stuart, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the first reason for refusal being the loss of visual amenity contrary to policy, and we will check the policy reference, and the impact on biodiversity contrary to policy Dev 26. And the second reason being the unacceptable overlooking to the neighbouring property contrary to Dev 1.
Is everybody okay with that? Last chance. Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much, and thanks to Stuart and Natalie as well there. That's, unless I'm very much mistaken, that's the only application before us today. So we'll go on then to have a quick look, if anybody wants to, at the decisions issued, page 13. Kathy, yeah?
These decisions are for 3 months because we haven't had a planning committee since August. And I'm just wondering if we could actually be sent these, or the planning committee could be sent these on a monthly basis so we can actually know what's going on. And the same applies to the appeals as well. Thank you.
Far too sensible and efficient for our liking, but we can certainly, I don't think there's any reason we can't do that, Stuart, unless I'm much mistaken. So certainly take that on board, Kathy, thanks. Anything on the appeal papers, Patrick?
Stuart, I don't think the appeal notices are actually on the council website. So, for instance, in relation to 53 Newnham Road, I've asked for a copy of the appeal letter from officers, but they direct me to the website, and I had this from residents the other night. You go on the website, I can't actually see any appeal notice, so I don't know if you can just double check the administration behind the scenes that the notices are actually being published, rather than it just a link to nothing.
Could we just
Thanks.
have a check off? All puns intended. If we can check that offline, that'd be great. Thanks, but we'll double check. Can you perhaps liaise with Stuart if there's still a problem? Oh, great, fine. Thanks. All said without your mic on. That was. I'm not going to ask you to repeat it. Don't worry. Anything else on appeals? No, I think that takes us to the end. We're just over an hour, so thank you everybody, and see you next time.